Another day, another trade, another day, another trade. Texans make another move. They send away another offensive lineman. 5 biggest takeaways from Nick Caserio's second splash of free agency. Texans stealing all the headlines. They aren't signing guys, but they are stealing all the headlines. Yesterday, it was the Laramie Tunsil move. Today, we start off our morning with the news that Kenyon Green is getting a change of scenery. The Texans trade Kenyon Green for CJ Gardner-Johnson. The two teams also swap picks. Texans send a 5th. The Eagles send a 6th in next year's draft. I got 5 big takeaways from this move. Much different feel, much different vibe than the Tunsil trade. But I think this could be another example of perhaps both teams winning a trade. Thought 1, I think this solidifies Kenyon Green as the worst pick of the Nick Caserio era. That was already probably solidified, but any small hope that this thing was going to turn around here, that ship had sailed. And quite frankly, I think a change of scenery will help Kenyon Green. Nick Caserio's done a really good job drafting. He drafted Derek Stingley in that same draft, but got a little bit cute, drafted a position where you need someone, you need it to work. When you talk about positional value, you draft a guard that early, it almost feels like a foregone conclusion that guy's going to thrive. And Kenyon Green did anything but that. So for all the good drafting that Nick Caserio has done, this move solidifies the Kenyon Green selection and everything, all the moving around and all that. It solidifies it as easily the worst pick of the Nick Caserio era. Thought 2, what went wrong with Kenyon Green? I think it was a number of things. I think at times there was a lack of confidence. I think early on, I don't think he was in as good a shape as he probably should have been. And you can also factor in the development. I mean, there's a reason that every year he had pretty much a new offensive line coach, and they got a new offensive line coach this year, a guy who was an assistant last year. I don't think the Texans did a good job developing him. And I think early on, maybe the game just wasn't as easy for Kenyon Green as it was at Texas A&M. But that's not to say that Kenyon Green didn't give his best effort. In fact, thought 5, I'll tell you, I'll summarize how I feel about Kenyon Green now that he is leaving Houston. Thought 3, I think the Texans are building one of the best secondaries in the NFL. You already have arguably the best corner in Derek Stingley, best rookie corner last year, perhaps in Kamari Lassiter, Kalen Bullock, and you add CJ Gardner-Johnson to the mix. I don't know what he goes by. I think it's CJ, Chauncey Gardner. It's all over the place. But you add a certain element of nasty. You add a guy that can make plays. You add a guy that's battle tested. Someone that covers the Philadelphia Eagles said, yeah, he's got a screw loose, but he makes plays, and he's pretty entertaining. You add him back with a ascending, I would say, Kalen Bullock and Kamari Lassiter in year 2. I think this is a top 5 secondary in the NFL, and I think it could be even better. So the Texans, their offensive line, a lot to be desired. Their secondary, perhaps one of the best young secondaries in the NFL. And Chauncey Gardner-Johnson's not really that old. He's still in his 20s. He's very, very battle tested. It's almost like a youthful veteran influence and perhaps a different vibe in the locker room for this squad. So you see Eric Murray get money whipped by the Jacks, which was that might have been the second most surprising thing in day 1. Chauncey Gardner-Johnson, more of a playmaking safety, put him back there. I think it's good to at least have something to show for Kenyon Green, and he gets a change of scenery. And Chauncey Gardner-Johnson brings Super Bowl experience to Houston and one of the best young secondaries in the league. Thought 4, this has no impact on offensive line need. I know that when you trade offensive linemen on back-to-back days, you automatically say, well, this increases the need for an offensive lineman and to figure something out. That might have been the case with Tunsil. No one thought Kenyon Green was going to be your starting guard next year. And if you were holding on to just you were holding on, you were less stable than Jack in the final scene of Titanic. If you were holding on to hope that Kenyon Green was going to be a starting guard in the NFL next year, especially in Houston with what we'd seen. Like that was a sinking ship. We all knew it. We knew that before this move. This improves your secondary. But as far as increasing the need on the offensive line, this does none of that. And they also added Laken Tomlinson, who's got a lot of experience starting at left guard. Not always great experience, but they added that. That's probably an upgrade for Kenyon Green, at least in this situation with where he was. So Kenyon Green being traded, I don't think that impacts or increases the desire or the need on the offensive line. That was already there. And Kenyon Green, to anybody that had like realistic grasp of where Kenyon Green sat on this offensive line, this impacts nothing when it comes to that. Thought 5, I think Kenyon Green's easy to root for. He might have been a little bit out of shape year one, but between the injuries and everything else, I think Kenyon Green later on in his Texans tenure, he handled himself and he controlled what he could control as good as any young man, as good as you could expect any young man to do so. And unlike a lot of the veterans or a couple of the veterans on his offensive line unit, whenever he had shortcomings and whenever he was getting criticized and whenever he had bad games, he was 100% accountable. He wasn't blaming referees. He wasn't saying he had targets on his back. He wasn't bragging about good individual performances when the rest of the offensive line struggled. Kenyon Green, he was in shape. He rehabbed as hard as he could after he got hurt early this year when it would have been easy to shut it down. You always saw him in the building. So sometimes a change of scenery can be a good thing. We saw it with the Eagles last year. Mekhi Becton was one of the most scrutinized players in the entire NFL. He goes to Philadelphia. He's a starting offensive lineman on a Super Bowl caliber team. I'm personally rooting for that for Kenyon Green. I don't think it was going to work here. I think whether it was confidence, whether it was just too difficult for him, whether it was injuries, whatever it was, maybe you just kind of feel cursed walking into the building if you're Kenyon Green after a while. And sometimes getting out of your hometown can be a good thing. And I know Kenyon Green, he's got a lot of loved ones here, and he had a lot of support. But sometimes just branching out. I know he went to college at A&M. He went to high school in the area. He went to Houston. This is Kenyon Green branching out. He's leaving his comfort zone. And I know that he's going to the right situation to where if he's going to make it work, he can make it work there. So Kenyon Green's very easy to root for, and he acts like the ultimate professional, and he's going to the right place for him. So sometimes both teams can win trades. I think this is a good move for the Texans. You get rid of a guy who it just wasn't gonna work for here, and you bring back a guy that brings a nasty element, some playmaking to a secondary that's already pretty nasty and makes plays. Texans building one of the most elite secondaries. They still have one of the worst offensive lines, and we'll see how this whole thing goes. That's 5 thoughts on the CJ Gardner-Johnson trade and Kenyon Green trade. Let me know what you think. Do you like this move? Do you think there's any hope for Kenyon Green? Do you think the Texans got a top 5 secondary? Let me know. Night stream 10:30, SNL 4 o'clock. It is the most fun time of the year. Free agency is upon us. There's no such thing as an off season in football. Always remember when it comes to this Texan stuff, we're all in it together. Thanks for coming.